Hi, everybody. This is Kubernetes SIG architecture meeting for May 15th. Let's get going. I think we have two agenda items today. And they're both from Runal. So you want to jump in, Runal?
Sure. Yeah, let's get started. So I think a couple of weeks ago, we presented this proposal for AI integration, and then we got feedback from SIG. So we have changed the scope entirely of the proposal. So what we are saying now is that we don't commit to any outputs. Like one of the things we mentioned earlier, okay, but we have MCP server as an output. What we are saying that instead of that, we have a place for collaboration where we can quickly experiment with different projects and ideas. So this is an intersection of Kubernetes and AI, both from the perspective of controlling Kubernetes through AI control planes like MCP and AI agents, as well as running those AI agent systems at scale on top of Kubernetes. So we are working with CNCF, and we are expected to get an organization under which we can host these experiments and repos. And then the output of this work group will be to come to uh, Kubernetes 6 with exact proposals on what should be changed and what recommendations are. Like, for example, on the API side, if we need any changes on the fields, recommendations on how authentication uh, could be changed, or guidelines on how auth will work when intersecting here, and so on. So that's a brief overview of the changes that have gone into the proposal. So coming back here to get more feedback, we proposed this to SIG API yesterday, and we got a +1 from the chairs there. Looking for approval from other SIGs next. I'll pause for questions.
Yeah, so the couple of questions here. One is this at the Kubernetes level still, Mrinal?
Yes,
not
yes.
at the CNCF level.
Yeah.
But we are talking about a working group in Kubernetes, but using a GitHub org that is not owned by Kubernetes for some of the experiments.
Yes, because this is to just signal that this is not official Kubernetes supported code, but an area of experimentation. And then we come back with exact proposals saying, we think as based on these experiments that these are the changes that should be made by a SIG, or this is a project that could benefit from a Kubernetes SIG ownership. So right now we are just like proposing the formation of the work group, and then actual projects or any ownership by SIGs will go through existing CAP process.
Okay.
Jim, this is a response to some of the feedback we got when our initial proposal was saying we could get a repository in Kubernetes SIGs to support, literally in my head, I was imagining Kubernetes SIGs MCP experiments, right? Like, and there was some pushback on that in the existing SIG structure on where ownership on that would be comfort with actually creating a repo or not creating a repo.
Yeah.
Practically speaking, I do feel like two things are useful. One, like SIG Arch, I still think should have a perspective on whether the Kubernetes project itself wants to have a perspective on AIs calling it or not. And so the work group, I think, is still leaving room for Kubernetes to answer that question, which I think is important. And then candidly, like for those that we were speaking with, trying to find a place to just get a community here, interested participants, you almost need some place for someone to run an experiment that they can contribute to under a neutral,
right,
or a neutral structure. So that basically the pushback to not having a K-SIGs repo here was to just try to find as closely of an adjacent home for anyone who wanted to experiment, but not trying to implicate that any code that's there has to be a Kubernetes project or not.
Yeah, I guess I'm going to have the same question with my TOC hat on too. right? So what is this GitHub org, and how are you going to like make sure that you mark it as like a unofficial project, just an experiment? This is not for production, not for it. This is just for the use of the working group, and don't put out any releases, those kinds of things.
Yeah.
What are the kind of, you'll have to put in some mechanisms to make sure that the code doesn't actually get out there, right?
Yeah, so as you can see, I mean, I had reached out to Chris to try to see if this was something he could facilitate, and he weighed in on the comment there.
Right.
Candidly, all that process that you're describing, I think it clearly needs to be done.
Yeah.
One of the frustrations I guess I would have is for all the hats we are wearing,
Yeah.
that we can give proactive next steps on how to actually reach to a state of closure, because I feel like to some degree, um, uh, we can get mixed perspectives on whether or not Kubernetes thinks this is important or not, whether the CNCF thinks this is important or not. And candidly, just speaking for Manal and myself, we're trying to find a place for people to do work together, which I think is the best spirit
Yeah.
of open source.
Right.
So whatever hat we're wearing, I feel like if we can give recommendations that realize that we're trying to get to an outcome in that regard, I think it's everyone's benefit. Just know it's warmly received, but we're trying our best here to navigate the process.
Yeah, understood. The follow-up question also would be, I'll ask that later. John has his hand up, so I'll yield.
Oh, yeah, well, I just wanted to mention, so I wasn't part of the previous discussion because I was on vacation or somewhere. But I, like with, at least with workgroup device management, we did create a K6 repo literally called workgroup device management. That's like just like where we can throw prototypes. There's like zero expectation of any support or code, like probably doesn't even compile anymore, right?
Yeah, I was perfectly comfortable with that, John, from the outset.
Mhm.
Like I said, we got pushback on that. And I tried to go back in my history book of like when we used to have, I don't remember if it was playground. There was a term before K-SIGs. But it seems like the perspective on a K-SIGs repo has varying levels of expectations on them among the project itself. And I'm just trying to be respectful of the various stakeholder SIGs at play here and their perspectives, right? And so uh, if if there's a general agreement that it's reasonable for people to have a shared space to create issues or pull requests or documentation describing their experiment or their benchmark or their test, I think that's really what we were looking for. And I think the different elevation of what is or is not a repo and the implications that come with it has varying perspectives across the project in today's state. So again, I'm happy with any outcome. If this outcome here is we're just going to go with K6 and do something, that's fine too.
I may be stepping in it here. I don't know. I don't know what's going on. But, yeah, from my perspective, and I'm just one person, it's like having an experimental repo in there makes sense. I don't think we want to create a repo that's a repository for some third-party code or something like that's intended to be blessed somehow, like Kubernetes project. But if it's experimentation and tests and things, that to me makes sense. As
maybe on the intersection, the types of repos I could imagine would be the same things that you, independent of whether or not there was an official MCP server from Kubernetes or an official A2A server from Kubernetes. Inherently, I do think there'll become a point in time where the Kubernetes project would be motivated to have a mock MCP server communicating with it in some way, shape, or form, or a mock A2A server communicating with it, or whatever other protocol might come forward around mock AIs calling Kube. But all that said, at this point, I think we're just trying to figure out two things. One, it seems like there's an interest in having a group speak to this topic, write the paper outputs, and speak to the challenges of what it means to advertise a Kubernetes API to an AI. And then there's a secondary topic on where and how do we facilitate any shared collaboration. You could evaluate the work group proposal from either perspective. I still think it has a role to play within Kubernetes. But yeah, basically feedback, we tried our best to warmly respond to the prior feedback. And if we want to iterate further, let me know.
As I recall, what this current proposal is doesn't ask for a repo. It says one exists. We want to be able to provide recommendations back. SIGs, are you interested in that? Is that, am I misreading that, Derek?
I couldn't hear you, David. I'm sorry. Can you repeat that?
My memory of the proposal reading this yesterday was that it didn't propose creating a repo. It proposed creating a working group that would provide recommendations to the SIG for various SIGs. And you asked SIGs, are you interested? And that seemed very easy to say yes to.
Right. The section that's highlighted here, though, is that we do think for the working group to have a meaningful place to do some shared work. In some cases, you would want a repository to house those experiments.
Sure.
And those experiments could be benchmarks, test scenarios.
But we could probably expect the working group to come and say, hi, I'm the working group. I'm the person who wants to do this. Can I have a spot to do it? Right? Versus maybe someday someone will come, let me create it. Right? We could expect a working group to come with, I want to do it. Right?
Yeah, I guess read the text that you see there. I think what we're trying to accommodate is originally we would have liked to have an experiment repo inside Kubernetes to explore the space. There was pushback on that. We still think for people to do meaningful work, they would want a place to contribute that work under some shared governance structure. And so we did reach out to say, hey, at the Linux Foundation or CNCF level, is there a place that these experiments could be fostered? And candidly, it seems like from the issues I've read, there's a lot of chatter across the CNCF community about how to foster this type of collaboration or experimentation. I look forward to figuring out what the structure will be there, but independent of that code location, I do think the work group, as you noted here, which is a place to describe and discuss the issues, is still important. And hopefully that's clear.
Jordan?
Too many mute switches. Yeah, I can see both desires. Like, we need a place to work. Let's figure out a way to work. And then the risks of sort of a vague, muddled repo that has a bunch of random stuff in it, like 6 months from now or a year from now or 2 years from now, it's like, maybe we should just turn this down. And that's fine from the perspective of like, there's benchmarks and white papers and bash scripts running experiments in here. Like, that's cool. We can just archive it and it's fine. And then you get some modules under there. It's like, no, we were actually like doing stuff with this. I think as we get down the road, like, it'll become clearer. And like the things that someone would be saying, no, we want to pull this out. Like, okay, pull that thing out into its own repo that you can cut releases from and like keep going forward. So I think it'll become clearer as we go. If we start with something like the lightest weight, easiest thing now, and things that want to be real things with real releases and real tags and real maintenance can like find a more permanent home. That seems reasonable.
Yeah, so in the spirit of the proposal as written now is we candidly were just trying to find a place to hold that experiment, even calling it experiment, and you see in the comment there is trying to make that as clear as possible.
Cool.
And an output of this working group as defined now would be potentially, if there's anything meaningful out of these experiments that questions the existing governance structure of Kubernetes, to say, should there be like a SIG AI integration, if necessary? Like, these servers kind of blur the line between API machinery and CLI. They're both clients and servers. And yeah, frankly, it's a little tough to figure out how to calibrate here as the AI space evolves around us.
I had one question. I see like stakeholder SIGs listed. What are you looking for from the stakeholder SIGs? Like, plus wanting the existence of the work group, or like people from this SIG will show up to participate, or?
Yeah, so two things. We had a form to just even figure out if there were people interested to participate, and I think as of the 9th, when we filled this up, we had like
25.
20.
Yeah, 25 as of today. Yeah.
Because we just wanted to know if there was a community at all, right? If there was not a community and there was no one going to show up to a meeting, then why have a work group, right? So this is truly in that spirit to figure out if there was a forum that folks in the project would be interested. All we were looking for here is like our original email to the SIG Arch mailing list. I think Dims, you responded with +1, that sounds great, or whatever. But then when going to speak to the other SIGs, like one, we kind of rewrote the proposal after we got feedback. And so just wanted to have some way of knowing, like, after we go and talk to a SIG, can you just give us a general act of this is good or not before we create the formal Kubernetes org issue? So it's really just kind of our paperwork to try to figure out, like, yeah, this worked for appropriately one of these SIGs, and we checked off our meeting list.
So I'm always going to lean towards, like, yes, start a working group and start talking, right? Like, get the official resources that you need. And then eventually, if you need a repo for something specific, we can do that. And if there is a throwaway GitHub org where you can work on things right away that is provided by LF, that is fine too. Just the only ask that I have there is, like, make sure that it is like in bold, blinking, that this is experimental. Do not use, do not touch. This is only for the members of the working group. Whatever caveats that you can put in however many ways, please do that. And so that will be outside the regular things, right? Like, you won't have access to the CI/CD systems.
Yep.
You release process and stuff like that. So just have as little lightweight as possible there, and do the things that you need to do. But anything meaningful, I think you should come back and ask for, like, what you need.
Yeah, that's what in the proposal that will come back to SIGs as needed.
I think that's the clear output. And
Right.
honestly, like, please push back if you view anything otherwise happening, Dims, with any hat. There's not any other intent than just try to figure out how to
Right. I'll tell you one more thing here, Derek, which is Chris is creating GitHub repositories, GitHub orgs under CNCF, and, like, I asked a question there, like, okay, there is a new GitHub org. Is it does it subscribe to the TOC rules? Right? Like, we have to ask that question from that point of view too. So that was the other hat I was talking about earlier, right?
Yeah. So I mean, I don't know every.
I mean,
I'm trying to follow the spirit of the process.
I hear you. I am bringing it up, and specifically because there is one project called Model Pack, which is in that GitHub org, and that has already submitted for Sandbox.
Right. My understanding was he was looking to potentially make that reusable after that process. But
so then it becomes like, okay, this is a GitHub org that actually has some code that is going to ship, and it also has other repositories which are not meaningful, right? Then it becomes, the GitHub org itself becomes muddled with, like, shippable code, and
yeah, I think Chris has an expectation that would be cleared up. But again, I would follow up with Dims on that clarification. I'm not trying to introduce confusion by saying this is what Chris.
We have to get it from Chris, not you. For you folks, the right thing to do is, yes, we should start a working group, start talking, and do whatever is necessary to get you off the ground, for sure, from my side.
Yeah, then with that, I think we're all good, right?
Yeah.
Sounds good. Okay.
I'm curious, looking at this list of SIGs, how soon do you think you'll get to the point when MCP will need access to a summary API to get current metrics from pod? So, like, some kind of metric storage for historical metrics. Do you think you'll get to that soon, and then you'll need SIG instrumentation and SIG node as well in this list? Or it will be like you see a lot of scenarios before that, there's purely API, and, like, you will be fine for, like, next couple of years?
It's a good question, Sergey. So I guess the way I was approaching this was, one, this is a fast evolving space, and even the best way to expose an existing project to an AI is something where there's mixed perspectives on. So particularly with something like MCP, like, there are projects that have been surveyed where it's just a wrapper on kube control, and AIs can do well calling that because they tend to be largely trained on humans calling CLIs in that type of documentation path. And that approach has pros and cons, and you can get really far with just, like, an intelligent model potentially doing tool calling to kube control. But then as you want to maybe narrow your AI to go to different personas and the types of problems you want to push it to, maybe you end up having to do more explicit functions for explicit scenarios. And then the trails from that, as we see, is like the number of tools you advertise for a given project integration of the AI affects the context window and may actually impair tool calling. All that to say, one of the things I think we're looking for the work group to talk about is just rallying around the use cases that they see energy around supporting in the space, right? So if you're wanting to support the node administrator persona or the workload administrator persona or the, you know, the SRE persona within your org, I think we're very keen on trying to figure out what those use cases are that are interesting in the community, because they might actually vary the approach you use to build that tool, and they might impact, you know, how you secure that particular integration scenario. So I can't have a clear answer, Sergey, on that timeline, other than like, if it's interesting to you, come forward to the work group, like discuss the use case.
Yeah, I wouldn't like read into this as that SIG node is not welcome. Definitely want to cover all possible use cases. If you have ideas, we should present them there for sure.
Yeah, 3 of you are from SIG node.
Yeah, I mean,
know, right?
Kubernetes is a huge project. And actually the other thing on this is like, one of the keen reasons Mrinal and I were kind of looking at this is like, there's so many other adjacent communities that build around Kubernetes that if we can figure out base patterns that others can leverage, then they may or may not have to do as much work in those other communities. But it all comes down to like personas and who they are and what they're doing and how they're interacting in the system. That, like, candidly, yeah, use cases are very welcome. This is a new space to explore, and yeah, this is not an exclusive list.
Okay, so what are the next steps here? What do you need from this group?
Do I read today's call as a +1 from Cigar? So maybe if John or Dims can add that as a comment, we can capture that. And I don't know, Jordan, if you represent Cigar, or maybe we need someone else to sign off on that.
I guess for us, we want to be able to translate this as appropriately into an org issue and know that process would be smooth. And like in the past, you linked to a mailing list, and you know, I know I proposed and Dims had act, but John, you had been silent. So like, if we wanted to have our acts here, that's fine too.
Oh yeah, no, I was supportive. I just was on vacation, so I didn't.
Yeah, no worries. I mean, we all have those issues. So we're just trying to get clarity.
On the doc, John +1, and I did a +1 on his comment. So.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, David and I both kind of represent for SIGAuth. Mostly it's like, what do you think +1 means? If +1 means like, I'm interested in knowing what patterns to use what we have works well and what gaps you find, like, yeah, I'm interested. I think that's useful. If it's people from SIGAuth will show up to do work, like, maybe, I don't know.
You never know that with the working group proposal generally. And so actually, it's more like, do you object to the formation or the concept of this space? It's not a compulsory requirement to participate.
No, I'm happy to have people poking at what we already have and seeing what works and what doesn't. Yeah, that's great.
I think it's super
awesome.
useful.
Thanks.
All right. Well, I appreciate the feedback today and look forward to discussing with others in the community in the space.
For me, it's more about like, we should do it ourselves rather than somebody else doing it and then dictating to us. You know.
Can you say it again, Dims?
I want us to be doing this work rather than somebody else in the doing it and then dictating to us, and like we are like, why do you think this is important, or like, why do you think this is the right way to do it, and then having we should do it. So yes.
I guess I think, like, I feel like that's what we're trying to do, but navigate all the feedback we've gotten. So I hope that's just you're glad that we're pushing this and, you know, trying to find a way to make it successful, because yeah, the danger is others can control how AIs call Kubernetes, which is not necessarily, or not even giving the inputs into Kubernetes about how they intend to call them. And so we're trying to make sure that
there is a risk that some way takes off and becomes popular, and it may not be more secure and not something we like, and we're just forced to adopt that. So it's good to have opinions here.
And then Jordan, your help is always appreciated in the authorization space. I mean, one of the first questions we always encounter when we hear about this is who is the authenticated actor, and is it deputizing some other calling actor? And some of these spaces have new approaches to authorization. So yeah, I feel like there's a lot to figure out and explore. So
the
always
MCP
welcome.
auth spec.
Yeah, my interest exceeds my capacity is usually.
Yeah.
All right, I think Mrinal, you also have the next topic here.
All
If
right,
we-
thank you. Okay, so we can move on to the next one. So I want to raise the topic of post-quantum cryptography and what it means for Kubernetes. So folks aware of post-quantum? Okay, a little bit. I can give a high-level overview. So basically, there is a risk where post-quantum computers will become capable of breaking existing encryption. And that means that if communications are not secured, they are exposed to an attack, which is called as harvest now, decrypt later. So let's talk about a specific scenario. So when you are using algorithms for TLS, right, there are two stages. The first stage, you exchange keys used for symmetric encryption using asymmetric encryption. Now, symmetric encryption itself is currently known to be secure from post-quantum attacks if your key size is good enough. Say, for example, 256. That said, CNSA proposal is asking for raising that to 384 and 512. So if that size is high enough, then symmetric portion is safe. However, the asymmetric portion where you establish the symmetric key is vulnerable to post-quantum attacks. So what someone can do is they can snoop on a TLS communication today, the entirety of it, and then maybe a couple of years from now, they are able to extract the key from the async encryption exchange and use it to decrypt all the symmetric communication that happened. So this is the most urgent problem that needs to be solved right now. And then there is a secondary problem where we want to change how we authenticate and how certificates are handled using MLDSA. So the key exchange is protected by something called as MLChem, which is now available in Go 124. And MLDSA is expected to land in 126 soonest. So with MLChem already being available, we have to start thinking about all the places where these kind of communications are happening into the cluster and within cluster components. So there are two parts, right? Protecting the customer application. So for that path, you need your browser. So Chrome has support for that. You need your cluster ingress and your application itself to understand MLChem. So already work is happening in, for example, Istio and other gateways where support is being added for MLChem. So that way the customer application will be protected. But we also have to protect our control plane endpoints and the communication between the cluster components. So what we need is a way to configure these components to use MLChem. There is a hybrid mode or there's a strict mode that can be enabled. In a hybrid mode, you can fall back to classical cryptography. In a strict mode, you fail if you're not able to establish the keys using MLChem. So want to kick off this conversation here. If there is interest, I think I've seen a lot of content from various companies folks are here from around post-quantum cryptography, but I haven't seen a lot of discussion in the context of Kubernetes. So want to kick off the conversation and see if folks are in agreement, and maybe we start creating issues and start coming up with a list of things that will need to be fixed to at least start adopting MLChem, and then maybe talk about MLDSA as we get closer to Go 126 next year. All right, I'll pause here.
Okay, let me kick it off. Your first question is this is not a government mandate of any kind, right? This is stuff that we are doing because this is the right thing to do.
This is the right thing to do, and there's some mandates that are happening from the government side as well.
It will come.
Even if you ignore that,
Yeah.
and it is the right thing to do, that we have to protect against post-quantum attacks, because a lot of research and advancements are made in that area. So roughly, folks are thinking that 2028 to 2030 is when there might be a breakthrough, and so it's becoming increasingly urgent to start addressing this now.
Okay. And the second question is, like, if it's already there in Golang, is it just a matter of us doing the right, changes in our code base to incorporate that, or is it more than that? Do we have to do anything more? Like, do we have to write a new library, or like, do we?
No. So this is going into the Go crypto library itself. So the standards are being approved. So MLChem is approved, MLDSA is approved. So that are third-party libraries, like one from Cloudflare. But we really, like, ideally we get it into Go crypto itself, and that's happening. So very specifically, we'll have to adjust the TLS curve preferences to allow these algorithms, and maybe some knob somewhere flipping the cluster components into that mode, and maybe minimizing the number of knobs you have, so you don't forget, oh, I enabled it here but not here, so my cluster is not actually compliant and not using MLChem everywhere.
Yeah, I'd seen some mentions of this. I hadn't followed it super closely. I think generally we try to stick pretty closely to the Go defaults. Like by default, we don't customize ciphers and things like that. So as Go starts allowing those things by default, we should largely inherit that in standard TLS setup stuff. Some of the places we have, yeah, I'd linked that in the agenda as well. Some of the places we have, like, it's possible to do custom TLS stuff. So we would want to sweep places where we've done that. Like I said, I hadn't dug into the details too much, but we try really hard to lean on standard Go stuff as much as possible, so that as they enable and implement stuff, we benefit from it.
I think that's fair, and I think, yeah, we can track this Go issue. So that's it. Like, the first part is available to start implementing MLChem, and the MLDSA will land in 126. And one more thing I want to, like, stress here is the term that's used is, like, crypto agility. When we start adopting these new algorithms, it's possible that we find some 0 days, and it should be possible for us to easily allow the cluster to be switched to another algorithm. Like, suddenly we need to change it overnight. So the challenge that we are seeing in the container space is that we hard coded SHA-256 in a bunch of places, and now we have to add support for 384 and 512, and so we are not really crypto agile there. So maybe I think we should think from that perspective when we start adopting these algorithms, because they are new in nature, and some of these algorithms that were proposed have been broken in the past 2 years. So it's still possible that after we adopt them, there's breakage and we'll suddenly need to flip the clusters. So if there's like an easy button switch to say, oh, okay, I want to use this algorithm across all the cluster components, that will be useful. John?
So I suspect this goes beyond Kubernetes project to our ecosystem. And so it would be useful, I think, to be able to, I mean, the thing that pops in my head is core DNS. Like, we have some TLS. It's not something people use much, but we have like DNS over TLS type of support. Like, so it'd be nice to get some recommendations out of this process for ecosystem projects that need to take this into account as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, happy to do that. So I'm not the expert. I'm the messenger. We have people who can talk at a much deeper level than me. So if needed, we can pull those folks in. But I can try to explain what I know best.
So not because I love working groups, but doesn't it seem like this would be another, we're going to have cross SIG. I know somebody put in auth API machinery, but like SIG network, right? Like for ingress and way. And I imagine there's going to be other SIGs that are going to need updates in how they behave, especially right, in the configuration the components, component config. So yeah.
I don't know. I don't know that I would start with a working group. I would probably start with like an umbrella issue or like one cap that has a bunch of participating.
Sure.
Like API machinery and auth are probably the two most impacted by this in terms of configuration and mechanics and things like that. I would probably start just with a doc or an umbrella issue that maybe pulls in some of the folks that Mrinal mentioned to give more details about like what exactly do we have to possibly change. And then
more, yeah.
size and scope of it, yeah.
Okay, sounds like a plan. I'll create an issue and then post it here, and we can post it on different forums for visibility.
Mridal, one additional question: like, how overlapping is it with FIPS? The work going on in FIPS and FIPS enablement in general, because that was a big problem for
yeah. So right now it's not part of the FIPS. However, the algorithms came under FIPS publications. At some point, we expect them to become a part of FIPS requirement. We don't know exactly when. So today, if you enable this, then it will be like either or. You either get FIPS support or you go into post-quantum mode. In the future, it'll be both.
Both. So then we are looking at like nothing, and then FIPS, and then post-quantum. So there'll be 3 off the bat. Yeah.
Well, they're kind of orthogonal. FIPS is like a certification regime.
Yes, exactly.
And it's a very slow-moving and old certification regime. And so anything cutting edge is going to be like years before it. You'll have to choose actually. Like, do you want post-quantum or do you want FIPS mode? And that's going to be a bad couple of years.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So FIPS is not necessarily like cutting edge of security. It's more certification, as Jordan said. Yeah.
Yeah, a tracking issue and like pulling in people who know what they're talking about and connecting it to people who don't know what they're talking about, but will be touching the code that makes that do the right thing.
Yeah.
That's super helpful. Thanks.
Sounds good. Thanks, folks.
Okay, awesome. That is the end of our agenda. I'll give one call for any other topics, although we usually make people put them on the agenda first. We have quite a bit of time otherwise. So you got going once here. All right. I take that as no additional topics, so we get a little time back. Thank you all. Good discussion, and see you in a couple weeks.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Folks. Bye.